The JSC, the EFF, has committed to fight tooth and nail what is called the micromanagement of African affairs by France. The party, led by Julius Malema, is marching to the French embassy in Pretoria today as part of the Africa Day commemoration, demanding that France must leave Africa alone. Let's cross to Julius Malema.
Through African resources and labor power, because they wanted to retain total control of all the former colonies. The French colonial governments destroyed everything they were unable to loot back to their country after independence. The French colonialists banned food, killed cows, and destroyed buildings and books. The former colonies of the French regime, such as Gabon, Mali, Niger, Senegal, Benin, Togo, Burkina Faso, Congo-Brazzaville, Ivory Coast, Chad, Central African Republic, Equatorial Guinea, Cameroon, and Guinea-Bissau continue to use the franc currency, and their monetary policy are dictated by the French Central Bank. France continues to maintain strong and intimidating military bases in almost all African countries they had colonial control over. African countries that were under French colonial rule are forced to pay colonial taxes and currently paying more than $500 billion to the French treasury every year. And that is separate from the many natural resources French companies continue to loot from the African continent. The colonial pact that France forced all its former colonies to enter into include the following: paying for the infrastructure France built during colonization, keeping 50% of their foreign reserves in the French treasury. 14 African countries have been doing this for years. Interestingly, these countries can only access 15% of their reserves each year. If they need more, they have to borrow it from France. France has the first right to purchase any natural resources discovered. French companies have the first right to choose on all government procurement tenders. Senior military officers are trained in France. France has the right to deploy its military in the African countries. Countries have to make French the official language and the education language, using the French colonial currency. Former colonies have to send a reserve report to France. Ex-colonies cannot enter into military alliances with other countries without approval from France. Ex-colonies are required to join forces with France during war or global crisis. The French government and regime have played a direct role in the coup d'etat and illegal and unlawful overthrow of many governments in the African continents. France is also responsible for the assassination of many prominent leaders in the African continent. Additionally, France continues to support and anchor nonsensical governments that have no respect for African people. This includes the following: Burkina Faso, which led to the assassination of Thomas Sankara; Guinea, Central African Republic; Chad. Mali's instability has always been sponsored by France. Ivory Coast illegal arrest of leaders and instability sponsored by France. The continued rulership of Paul Biya in Cameroon is financed and maintained by France. The permanent and perpetual destabilization of the Democratic Republic of Congo is aided by the French government. We commend and appreciate the work of revolutionary anti-colonial forces that are beginning to undermine French colonialism, particularly in Mali, and call on all neo-colonized people under the so-called Francophone to reject France's colonial rulership and control. We commend the many anti-colonial and pan-Africanist forces in all the African countries and reiterate our call for the unity of the African continent. Despite the micromanagement of the former colonies, the French government continuously uses its resources to corruptly influence the internal processes of electoral outcomes of Africa's continental organizations such as the African Union and the Pan-African Parliament. France continued to identify puppets in different African countries and filled them as candidates for important and strategic positions in different continental multilateral organizations. The economic freedom fighters, therefore, stands here in front of the embassy of the slave traders, the colonialists, the warmongers, and the imperialists to make the following demands. France must grant full independence to all African countries and allow them to determine their own currencies, monetary policies, and economic direction. France must stop all colonial taxes because it is the wealth of the African continent, the blood and sweat of Africans that build all infrastructure which African countries are forced to pay for many decades after the so-called independence. France must immediately remove all its military bases which is currently stationed in Africa. These include, but is not limited to, military bases, French soldiers, French aid through arms, and any presence of French influence in the armies or militia groups in Africa. France must desist from interfering in the economic affairs of African countries through monetary policy, and the use of their currency in West Africa must gradually decrease towards establishing currency system determined by Africans themselves. France must return all mineral and fiscal reserves held by the French treasury to African nations and any of their former colonies. France must pay reparations to all of its former colonies, particularly the architects of the greatest slave rebellion known to humanity, Haiti. Haiti has had its development reduced by racist global world order which feared African independence and the first black-led state. The removal of French as an official language in Africa in favor of continental reconstruction of African identity, away from imposition of white civilization standards and norms as a measure of humanity. France must stop its sponsorship of divisions that occur in Africa's continental multilateral institutions, particularly the Pan-African Parliament and the African Union. These demands are made to the government of France and sent to all colonial and neo-colonial forces in the African continent, including the United Kingdom, Portugal, Spain, Italy, Belgium, Germany, and the United States of America. All forms and manifestation of colonialism in the African continent must be dismantled. It is our obligation as a generation to work fearlessly to dismantle colonial and neo-colonial rule. The EFF will do everything in its power to destabilize all forms of colonialism in the African continent and will play an unapologetic and leading role in the dismantling of all remnants of colonialism and colonial rule in the African continent. We stand on the shoulders of great anti-colonialist Pan-Africanists such as Kwame Nkrumah, Sekou Toure, Emperor Haile Selassie, Ben Bella, Thomas Sankara, and many others. The EFF expects a response to all these demands within 14 working days. If there is no believable and practical response within the 14 days, we will, as the leadership of the EFF, outline a clear and practical program on how we will undermine and counter the French continued colonialism of the African continent. I thank you. Amanda! Amanda! Comrades, we are here to hand over this memorandum to the embassy of France, which must be taken directly to the government of France. We now call the representatives of the embassy to come and sign the memorandum and acknowledge receipt of the memorandum. Fighters, let's give the ambassador an opportunity to acknowledge the receipt of your memorandum. Thank you.
Thank you very much and good day to everyone. I want to say that we respect the EFF as a political movement. Also, I think you are very good organizers. You came to see us today, so it was normal to come out and to receive your memorandum. We cannot sign the memorandum because it's your memorandum, but we will convey the memorandum to Paris. And also, I want to say an important message, that we have our disagreement, okay? And today, France is a partner with Africa, and we are friends of the African nations. Thank you very much.
Amanda! Amanda!
Julius Malema being